Yeah. So I spent this afternoon reading all of the executive actions, and Haley went to therapy. So she was gone for like 2 hours, and that was about as much time as it was to go to like whitehouse.gov and like read every single article that's come out and get kind of a picture of everything that's going on. And
It's really
when she
kind of
got back,
nice the way that he did that. I mean,
"Hmm?
there's because like so much went dark. Like as soon as they
Yeah,
took over, they everything flipped. But then it took me a little while to figure out where those executive actions were. But it's nice. I mean, everything that he's done is right there. And a lot of them are really interesting in that they're
yeah."
nothing nearly like what people have
I
been
was
talking about.
literally telling Haley about that. And it's like, it's kind of weird listening to the podcast and the way that social media are talking about it and then reading it. It's like, yeah, we're going to destroy it, but then we're going to set up a council to, look back at it in 30 days to figure out what we did. Or for the America trade policy, in March 2024, we're going to come back and look to see what it is that China did for intellectual property and see if they've done anything within this time frame that maybe we need to reevaluate. It's really, really interesting reading all those things, but she came back from therapy and then I just needed therapy after reading all of it.
I like the thing that really was illuminating for me was the Doge
Yeah,
creation because
because
it's
it's only
like
18 months.
and it there's like everybody thinks that Doge is going to be like recommending which agencies to get rid of, and
No, no. And
it's completely technology. It's
yep.
literally that Stargate project that they announced yesterday.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what it is. It's completely limited to tech, and so there it's not there's no personnel other than the personnel within Doge. It's like, oh, okay, let's look at the government and see how we can use software, AI, networking technologies to make what the government does better. Not, oh, eeny meeny miny mo, this agency's got to go.
Well, and one of the interesting things that I was looking, a lot of the executive actions were like pillars of things that he was wanting to do. So one of the other executive actions on top of Doge was bringing back competitiveness within the federal job market. And they were talking about 41% of interviewed federal leadership said that it was hard to fire people that were not good at their job because it's kind of that whole mentality of you get a cush federal job, you're going to have that for your career, you're good. But with this is an entire shakeup of the federal hiring process because there's the hiring freeze, which was another executive action. And basically, it's okay, if you don't want to come back to work, you're going to be cut. And that's an easy way of reducing some of it. But we're going to need to reduce a lot of it, which administratively that's what people have been talking about for a long time is there's a lot of government bloat and a lot of things that we could automate, especially with how much AI power we have now. So this is all of those low level jobs becoming a nothing thing so we don't have to pay for it anymore. And then you have a more competitive market so government jobs can compete with private market jobs. And I think that that's why you're not seeing a lot of high quality talent going into the government sector is because why would I want to make 70,000 a year when I can make 200,000 a year and get travel benefits and get all this other stuff? Get stock options, not have all this law and bureaucracy surrounding my job. So it was something that kind of makes sense that they're wanting to make those high paying government jobs a much more competitive market because that's the only way, especially in the tech sector, that the government's going to be able to compete. Because if, you can get a job from OpenAI and they're going to pay 5 times what the federal government's going to pay, why would you?
Yeah, and it focuses on what the senior executive service, which is the most senior managers within the government. And and those folks, yeah, it's very, very difficult once somebody has an SES position, it's hard to get rid of them. But like, I mean, I was a federal manager for 10 years, and I mean, I've heard those same criticisms that it's difficult to fire people, but it's not. I fired plenty of people while I was a federal manager, and but what it does do is it one forces you to try and fix the employee before you fire them, so that there's protections in place that you
Yeah,
can't
like
just
putting them
willy
on a
nilly.
PIP process.
Yeah, and you know, the whole performance improvement program, you can't just like pencil whip it. You've got to like legit try and make the person understand their job better, or you know, send them to training or whatever they need that might help them. And so, you know, really what you're firing people for is people who are unwilling to change, or are dishonest, you know, and they lie. But you know, beyond that, uh, and you know, one of the things that, so like, I took over management at one location from someone else, and they had fired somebody, but they pencil whipped that stuff, and they were able to fire the person. But you know, 9 months later, when I after I had taken over, that employee came back, and they came back as a supervisor with all their back pay. And you want to talk about a difficult you know, circumstance to navigate at a work location, is a supervisor gets fired, and then 9 months later they come back. So everything's changed in 9 months at a work location. Lots of things change. Um, so anyway, there's so I I I just never, when I was in the federal government, I did not have the issues that I hear a lot of people complain about. And I tend to think that it's probably because the managers are a little bit lazy or a little bit power hungry, and they think they ought to be able to just fire people on a whim.
See, and I think that that can always come back down to like the individual. Are you a manager? Are you a leader? And if you're a leader, you're very much not going to want to fire someone immediately and just go to the shortcut solution, because that's not how you create a good culture at your workplace. It's not a good way of being able to make it so that way people actually trust your decisions. And if you're just wanting to manage everything and, okay, well, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, then yeah, you're going to go to those immediate firings. So, and I would imagine that you find a lot of that kind of management mentality when you get into positions like you had in DHS.
Yeah, and it costs so much to hire somebody. You know, I mean, you've got to you know, get a background check on them, and you got to get them trained for the position, and then um, there's just a lot of infrastructure cost that you've got to go through all over again to 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 completely replace a person. It's always been, and this is you know, when I think about conservatism, uh, I think that's a conservative principle. You know, it's a whole lot easy to take something that you've got that's working okay and make it better than it is to create something brand new and try and get that brand new thing working. Um, and so I think it's always best to, whenever possible, conserve what already exists. Um, and not, and that's what I mean now in this whole election thing. That's the problem that I had with the Biden administration, is holy cow, they threw every norm out the window and just started trying to change the way government operates, the way government functions, what government can do and can't do.
Arguably, Trump's doing the same.
Yeah, but I would argue that Trump is actually going back to, core principles. I mean, there's
And I
you know,
don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that. But I would, the argument that I'd make is I think that, it's both of the administrations are going to very much try and drastically change what government is. One shifted way far to the left, and one shifted way far to what we were more institutionally like forming the nation as opposed to being a formed union. And I think that that's kind of the interesting thing about when I look at all of these executive actions together. I was talking to someone about this yesterday, and during his first administration, it seemed like he really favored isolationism and really like bringing us back into, okay, we need to have our own supply routes. We need to be able to make sure that we can really rely on ourselves. And now it seems like the reason that he's wanting to cut us off from so many different relations is so that way we can maintain all of that wealth for ourselves and then be able to expand with that wealth. So it really seems like it goes back to the expansionism of America as opposed to this is where we are. Now we're developing who we are as a culture as opposed to expanding out more lands. In the interesting thing about it is in this approach, it actually brings more culture into everything.
yeah, and I think, I mean, at least again, I give everybody 100 days. There's because I mean, if 100 days into this, um, President Trump is only got half his cabinet filled, and he had to replace a couple people, and he doesn't have any, serious legislative wins.
So what do
Um,
you think? Do you think he's going to get his SecDef? Do you think that
oh yeah,
Pete,
yeah,
yeah?
I think that yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a complete partisan vote. I do not think there'll be a single Democrat vote for Pete Hegseth. But I thought it was interesting that Marco Rubio got a unanimous election as Secretary of State, which I think was well deserved. He was a really good senator,
Yeah.
um, and I watched his speech that he gave to the State Department staff when they welcomed him in. I think it was this morning. Um, or yesterday morning, maybe. Yeah, it was yesterday morning, I guess. But yeah, I mean, he was very, very clear, very positive. I mean, he was really, really. I mean,
Well,
if
and he
anybody
was one
was
of the
thinking,
better contenders in the 2016 election. And that's when I remember him. And not paying as much to that side of the aisle over the last couple of years. The only things that I've seen, I haven't hated from him.
yeah, and that's the thing that I think that the Republicans have that the Democrats just plain don't have at all is somebody on the bench
Yeah.
who can run in the next election. Because I think Rubio is really, really impressive. DeSantis, the governor of Florida, really, really impressive. I think JD Vance is very, very impressive. Hans and Hegseth are kind of similar in that they were well, I guess not that much. But Vance was a corporal in the Marine Corps, and Hegseth achieved the rank of captain. But I mean, I have met many lieutenants, like I'm sure Lieutenant Hegseth was. Uh, and it's like the accusations that his sister-in-law made against him is that he got a lap dance from a stripper while he was in uniform. And
Yeah.
I'm like, that is the most Joe thing. Joe being, your standard infantry private, your standard infantry lieutenant, that just gets his knucklehead problems. Uh, but but I think
But it's low hanging fruit for the kind of trouble that those guys are going to get into.
yeah, but it's you know, uh, in the job that he's going to do, it's endearing. I mean, it's like there are more people in the Department of Defense that can identify with, uh, you know, getting a lap dance than not. You know, it's a very common thing, and the notion of like like a sister-in-law of your ex-wife or a former sister-in-law from your ex-wife, there that is a lifelong enemy. Your ex-wife's sister is going to hate you. I mean, that's just it. I mean, there will never be, a sister-in-law, a former sister-in-law that's like, oh, well, I don't know why they broke up. He was such a wonderful person, or she was such a wonderful person, whoever, because you're going to stick with your sibling. I mean, that's just, that's the
I
way that's going to go.
Yeah, that's I when I was trying to look up any information which I have a funny story about this. But when I was trying to look up any of the information on the allegations, like all of it is just a legend. Nothing is concrete or anything. The only things that are a little bit concerning to me is there was a part of it where it seems like she and him had kind of an understanding that he had a fuse, which a lot of people in those kind of positions have fuses, and it's kind of understood that it's getting worked on sometimes, hopefully, but they had a safe word. And there were times that he disregarded a safe word. And that seems to me like, okay, well, are you someone who's capable of making a decision and then going past that decision? And to me, that's a judgment call of, are you able to, if any of that gets substantiated? Now, past that, yeah, like, okay, should you have done that? No, but is it really that big of a deal to get a lap dance while you're in uniform? No, not really. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, and that's the thing is growing up with watching the Clinton deposition. If those are the things that people are getting mad about, like get mad at the job they're going to do, not necessarily the morality of the character of them, because everybody's going to have a little bit of a different morality in situations like that.
Yeah, and if you think about the difference in power, so a lieutenant getting a lap dance from a stripper. To be perfectly honest, there's the person who probably has more power in that circumstance is the stripper. Uh, there's but when you're talking about the president of the United States having sex with an intern in the White House.
It's a little bit different.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there is a significant power differential there, and 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 the president of the United States should have more judgment than a lieutenant, getting
Okay,
drunk with his buddies.
on this, on this. So I went to work on Monday and I like go into the back of the barber shop and I put on CNN just so I can have live coverage of the inauguration. And it's funny because I'm the only one in the shop who had any intention on watching. Nobody wanted to watch it whatsoever. And I was like, this is history. I watch it every 4 years. I've been watching it every 4 years since Bush Jr. Like this is my Olympics. This is my thing. So one of the barbers comes in from the back and she's got her head down. She looks up. She's like, ah, fuck, this is on. I was like, yeah, it's just gonna be today. It's gonna be today. It's totally fine. So we're watching everything, and then Elon Musk comes on, and he does his weird thing. And in the back of my mind, I'm just like, all right, I'm trying to really, really like get the context of this one as much as I possibly can. And when Haley got home, I was like, hey, did you see that video that's been going around the internet today? She's like, no, I haven't seen it yet. It's like, oh, okay, well, let me show you something. I could probably give him the benefit of the doubt of maybe it being like my heart goes out to all of you, but I have a really hard time with that. But the issue that I really have is after more videos of the event came out and realizing that Okay, you didn't just, you know, make a poorly made gesture once. You turned around and did it towards the American flag. I have issues with a president who puts someone like that so close to their proximity at a presidential inauguration. Like that to me is the big issue here that I don't actually see a lot of people like there's a lot of people talking about it, but not in the sources that I would hope that people would be talking about it.
Now, there's and I mean, I'll just tell you, I'm a huge fan of Elon Musk as the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX and Neuralink and the whatever the tunneling program. So
Oh,
he's the
the Boring
CEO.
Company's gone. Yeah, no
Yeah,
more Boring Company.
I mean, he's a really capable CEO. So I'm a fan of him there. I'm not a fan of him uh, of what he was claiming that Doge is going to be, because uh, you you can't just go in and start willy nilly, uh, you know, dropping pieces of the government out because you don't think they're important, because they're important to somebody. And if you're going to get rid of it, then there's a reason why those agencies are created by law, and you've got to if you're going to get rid of an agency, you've got to convince Congress to eliminate the agency. And I think that's and 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 again, it's like we were talking about the telework thing. Uh, Before any of this happened, the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, did a telework analysis this last summer, and in the first place, more than half, 54% of federal employees have to go to work every single day at a physical location because they're border guards, they're TSA security officers, they're FBI agents, they're food safety inspectors. There's just all kind. So more than half of the government has to go to work at a physical location every single day that they work, and um, there's about 10% of the government were hired for remote jobs. So these are people who were hired because they've got a particular skill set, but there's not even a government office for them to go to. Um, a good example might be a CIA officer who is hired in a particular place, and they move around from that particular place. But their job is not to be at CIA headquarters, and you don't want them to go to CIA headquarters because it's going to blow their cover. And part of their job is not letting anybody know that they're a CIA officer. So that's a pretty sizable portion. But then the way that telework works for federal employees is you have to sit down with your manager and develop a telework agreement. And all telework agreements in the federal government require that even if a person is working from home, 2 days every 2 weeks, they have to work from the office. So normally that would be like one day a week they got to go to the office, but if they miss 1 week, they can do two the next week or whatever. So 2 days every 2 weeks they have to go to the office. And when you look at the coding of their pay, 60% of the hours of the employees who were teleworking was spent working at a physical location. So there are no federal employees, literally none, except for the remote employees, the ones that I mentioned before, who are just sitting on the couch doing all their work and never going into an office. That just doesn't exist. But they started this narrative that like that's what it was. Musk even posted on X that only 1% of the federal workforce was working from from an office, which is just, I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. If you go to a Social Security office, you don't go to the Social Security office and talk with a camera for an employee that's from those Social Security caseworkers are at their office doing what they do. And like so like I've got a VA counselor I got that I talk to on a regular basis. It's a VRE counselor, so he's overseeing my education, right? So well, all of our meetings are done by telecommunication. I don't go to his office. So him being in his office has no effect on the work that he is doing for the customer. Now, it may have something to do with his boss. Maybe his boss wants him to be in the office or something like that. But but literally for that employee who works face to face with customers, and the way he's working face to face is through a telecommunications portal. Nobody cares where he's at. It just doesn't. It doesn't matter. But anyway, to get back to Musk, so I'm not happy with Musk being involved in the government at all. I think he's got too many companies that are being regulated, and he's too volatile a person to put in charge of really, really important public good things. But it's also important, I think, and this is interesting to remember, that Musk is an adult who has a pretty significant case of Asperger. And I mean,
So
now
am
it's now.
I. So am I. That does not give him an excuse whatsoever.
Well, there, but you're not on national TV all the time, and one of the
Fair,
challenges.
fair.
So I mean, uh, that whole the social and communication challenges, and in particular, um, having struggles with nonverbal communication. So, like a person with Asperger won't look you in the eye, and they fidget, and sometimes they make hand gestures that don't coordinate with what the word. So, if you actually listen to what he was saying, I watched the whole speech, and he didn't turn around and salute the flag. What he was doing is he was doing the exact same movement for the people who were in front of him, and there was a whole crowd of people that were behind him and above him on a platform. So when he turned, and they weren't at the exact same time. So when they make it look like, oh, he did this to the front and then he turned around and he did it to the back, there was a pretty significant uh, portion of time in between those. In fact, he did the one to the back first, and then later he did the one to the front. And he specifically said, "My heart goes out to you," or something to that effect.
And I agree, and I agree. But what you just did there, my heart goes out to you. That is such an easy universal gesture that this is so easy. It's not, hey, what's that over there in that direction? Somewhere on the alt right was some, I don't know where it's in. But when you look at comparisons of anyone who uses the gesture of my heart goes out to you, and you look at historical figures that have used the exact same gesture that he has, it makes no sense to me whatsoever that it would be used in such fervor for such a heartfelt, like I get that there's a passion behind it and there's so much enthusiasm in the moment, and I really do understand that aspect of being very, very overwhelmed with your emotions, and that's it's challenging, and especially when you're not a social person in that kind of a setting. I can understand all of those different pressures. And that was, I remember I went to the governor's ball years ago, and I was like on my way to go there. I got tipped with 2 tickets to go, and there's no reason that I should be going to a governor's ball whatsoever, especially not the Republican governor of Idaho. And on the way there, I'm texting my buddy who does the social media accounts and project management marketing, and he's on a team of people with Microsoft for Xbox, and he does all that stuff on the regular. He's going to these events, and he's doing live broadcasts, and he is the face of a large brand. And I'm texting him like, I have no idea what to do around this many people. What do I do? And he's like, just have a couple drinks. Like, just lubricate yourself and get going. And I get the overwhelming aspect, and having that kind of a disability, and being really awkward in the moment. I still think that there is some accountability that needs to be had, that, hey, if you did something, like, say, hey, you know what? I see that there's some similarities here. I fucked up. That's so easy to say. And it's so easy to acknowledge, of like, hey, you guys, I did fuck up. I was overly passionate about something. But if you don't even say that, and you're just like, look at my entire speech, and make the decision for yourself. And a lot of people are coming to the same conclusion, that you are making some pretty hateful gestures at one of our nation's most important ceremonies. To me, that is a giant red flag in the middle of all of this.
Yeah, I think again, I'm not a fan of Musk in a government role. But when I look at it, it does make sense to me. It does make sense to me that he would, uh, because I've seen him at other events, where he was, like, announcing the the Cybertruck, and when he did an event where he was announcing a Neuralink implant in pigs. Um, uh, there's he when I watched him at those events, I was like, yeah, he's really awkward, and he's overwhelmed. He doesn't really, so it makes sense to me. But to your point, with, just come clean on it. I think, in his mind, he was making the gesture that matched what came out of his mouth. And if he were to be like, oh, I made a hateful gesture and I'm sorry. Well, that's kind of like acknowledging you made a hateful gesture. And I guarantee you, no one in the media is going to give him any credit for saying, "Oh, I made a hateful gesture, but I didn't mean it." They're gonna pounce on the fact that he admitted he made a hateful gesture. When again, when I look at it, I don't think that's what he did. I think maybe I can understand why people uh, uh think that, because yeah, I mean, I can understand that, but given the context, if there's, and particularly given the context of, uh, when, in the first administration, when when President Trump, kind of, imitated uh, the actions of a reporter
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
were,
yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, that was clearly, I mean, that was very, very clear that uh, he was making fun of this guy because of his physical disability, and everybody jumped on Trump, rightfully so, for, publicly humiliating somebody because of their physical disability. But those exact same people, and uh, they pounce on Musk for doing the exact same thing. He's behaving like all kind. I just last month I was studying. Again, this goes to the whole Catholic thing. There's several uh, Catholic parishes around the country who are doing masses. They're celebrating the mass, but they've orchestrated the mass so that it's um, accessible to people who are on the autism spectrum of disorders. So so there so there's different music, and the lighting is different, and the way that the priests speak is very, very different. Um, and they don't do it all the time, but they make it so that the people who can't go to mass normally, because they're they're triggered by the lights and
Yeah.
and the smells and all the hubbub that goes with a traditional Catholic mass, is difficult for some people to sit through.
Well, and I could
Um,
also imagine that a lot of the symbolism that is in Catholicism is hard for someone who takes things really literally to understand. So being able to adapt a message so that way it's a little bit more of a literal interpretation of something, so that way it could be digested more to the individuals, that would make sense.
Yeah, those are the things that they don't change. In the Catholic Church, I was, in fact, last night I was talking with people about aspects of the Mass that like one of the early church fathers, a guy by the name of Justin, wrote a letter to the Emperor. The Roman Emperor was like, "Who are these Christians and what are they about?" So Justin's like, "Hey, he wrote him a letter, and he's like, "Hey, I can tell you what they do." And so he wrote down what the early Christians were doing in a letter to the Roman Emperor, and I mean, not everything is the exact same, but the core elements of what the Catholic Mass is today is the same core elements that was the Catholic Mass in 155, 100 years after the death of Jesus. So some things, in particular the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper is taken at a mass, and Catholics believe that it is the real presence. And some people get into the whole material, oh, it's body and blood and this, that, and the other thing. But those kinds of symbolisms, those figurative expressions, are considered very core to the Catholic Mass, and they don't change them at all.
It's interesting you say that, because I was actually thinking about this earlier today, because I was reading something about modern Christianity, and growing up Southern Baptist in the 90s, and moving around so much, being involved in the church. We almost planted a church, and really, really being active in the church from the 90s to the mid 2000s. The current Christian movement is just something that is unrecognizable to me anymore. Like, it's the people kind of bastardize what the words are and just kind of twist things to be their message. And it just kind of dawned on me. I was like, I kind of think I get why Dad actually went towards Catholicism. Is like, there's a certain aspect of, oh yeah, there's consistency with that, and like they don't change. There's it no matter what happens. Like, there's incremental changes. Like, the current pope is cooler than the last pope, and the last pope was cooler than the last pope. But I mean, the pope before that sucked a lot.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that uh, I mean, if you're talking about foundational metaphysical truths, um, you know, you wouldn't expect for those things to change. There's but when you talk about cultural expressions, boy, would you ever expect that to change? Yeah, because there. I mean, uh, just in my lifetime, you think about it. I was born in the '60s, so I was kind of a '70s kid. Um, and my experience being a '70s kid was totally different from your experience being a 90s kid. So those 20 years, the culture just, they're almost night and day.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so you would expect that to change. And there's uh
Well,
there
and
there
one
I
of
think
the Oh, sorry. One of the reasons that I was actually thinking about this was in when Trump was in his first administration and really, the trade war with China first started. I really started looking at what China was doing with the Belt and Road Initiative, and really thinking about what Xi Jinping is doing with his legacy, and not necessarily like, does he care about the people that are under him right now, or is he trying to set up China for the civilization that'll exist there 100 years from now. And out of all of the people that Trump seemed to be impressed by, I had kind of this realization that he was impressed by people who really understand legacy. And whether or not you necessarily agree with legacy or not, especially on like that large of a global scale, and the implications behind it, and like the types of decisions you have to be able to make at that level, when you're playing that game of chess, you're not necessarily thinking about, okay, is the is me closing down borders right now going to upset the people that are currently living, or am I going to realize that the founders wanted immigrants because there was space, and now America is at a space where we might not necessarily have the capacity to do the things that we can do. Do we want to have a legacy movement for how long and sustainable this can be? Because at the current rate, it's not sustainable. And the interesting thing about like all of those aspects of the executive actions that I was looking at was I was listening to a podcast this morning that was talking about the app that was being used to be able to schedule all of the appointments. And those numbers weren't being included in the overall numbers that the Biden administration was reporting. So they were only reporting half of the numbers. So the increase over the last year was like drastically significant. And what my takeaways from all of this is they set up this app that I think was probably a really good idea. Is we probably, there's a lot of people that are trying to use this system. We should probably streamline the system, but they streamlined the system for the people wanting to get in, but they didn't streamline the system or set up any kind of security to be able to support the amount of people that would be coming in now that there was this ease. If you were waiting for a physical body to get to the border, you would be able to say like, okay, cool, we can manage this capacity. This is like when you were doing staffing at the TSA. You can expect the ebb and flow of the volume of humans during a certain amount of time. This is the same thing I was doing staffing analytics at T-Mobile. But when all of a sudden you now have people who are thousands of miles away, but now they're not even going to show up other than, okay, well, we've got this thing scheduled, so we're just going to kind of be in a staging position and be ready for it. It kind of sets an unrealistic expectation to the people that are actually seeking those things. But the other interesting thing that they were talking about was the app was actually showing reasons that people were seeking asylum, and traditionally asylum is if you are genuinely in fear of your life. And a lot of the asylum seekers were seeking asylum for economic situations, which is not something that America typically offers asylum for, because you're not in any danger. It is a more of an economic situation, and that's an issue that your country needs to manage their economic issues within their borders, and it's not something that we offer asylum to. If your government is coming after you and you know, are fleeing cartels, and if you have all sorts of corrupt politicians that are threatening your family, that's a valid reason to flee and go for asylum. And we can anticipate that kind of volume of people because we're aware of the geopolitical happenings of all of the nations south of us. But if it's, well, I'm not doing well financially and I need to go, there's no way of actually anticipating the amount of people that would be pursuing citizenship to America for that.
Yeah, I think a couple things. First, that's kind of the idea behind the Remain in Mexico policy is that uh, yeah, that is true, and it makes sense that if you're fleeing from some place that is um, filled, but asylum is really for political persecution. So you're being pursued by the government for a particular reason, but whatever that reason is, the status quo is that you go to the first country that's safe. So, like if you're coming from Central America and you're coming up through Mexico, Mexico is an established democracy. They've got a law. It's a completely different circumstance in Mexico than it is in Venezuela or El Salvador. Um, so, so the status quo, as far as like global migration, is you stop at the first safe country, and you wouldn't, you know, go, say, well, hey, I want to claim asylum in Canada because I'm being attacked in Venezuela. That doesn't make any sense. There's
That's just you
Canada.
wanting to move to Canada.
That's exactly right. That's just you wanting to move to Canada is all it is. So the status quo is okay. You're in this place now. You've got to make the case for why do you need to come to the United States if all you're doing is trying to flee an unsafe circumstance in your home country. As soon as you get away from that unsafe circumstance, that reason for immigration no longer is valid. So now you're wanting to immigrate for economic reasons. And then the other thing is you talked about the long game. Uh, and just as an aside, I got to say that we give China a bunch of crap, but Xi Jinping is a impressive human being, and his story is an impressive story. And he is exactly doing what you just described. He's playing the long game, and he came from as far away from the pinnacle of communist power as you can possibly get. His dad was imprisoned. He was raised on a prison farm because his dad was imprisoned, and he worked his way all the way back up to being in the Communist Party again, and then earning credentials where now he's the chairman of the Communist Party. And so he's a very, very impressive human being, regardless of, obviously we're in a competition for resources with China, but the Chinese people are wonderful people. They're very entrepreneurial, and the notion that he's not a smart, talented, capable leader for that country is just a false notion. But the other thing, when you start talking about the long game, we got to remember Al Qaeda and the terrorists who attacked us on September 11th. That was not the first time they tried to knock down the trade centers. The Blind Sheikh tried to do it in, I
No,
think it was
because it was
1993.
90, oh, 93. I was going to say, was it 97 or?
I thought hang on, I'll ask. Say something while I type.
Hey, not Siri. Oh, so the story I was going to tell you, since you're asking your AI, so I'm using ChatGPT and I'm getting a little AI assistant set up, and I'm asking it a whole bunch of questions. And the first question that I'm asking it is, okay, let's create a personality for you. Do you want to be a male or a female? wants to be female. Awesome. So, of any generation that you could choose, you can choose to be the greatest generation, or you can choose to be the generation that's currently entering the workforce, or you can be anything in between. What do you want to be? Millennial. Okay, you'll be a millennial. That's great. We're going to be able to collaborate really easily. Here's the task that I'm going to give you. Here's the role that I want to have you. What is the name that you want to give yourself? So we're like giving her a whole bunch of personality. And she's basically this 28-year-old reporter who is a mixture of formal and self-taught education. And I'm having fun playing with my AI bot. And then I was like, okay, I need you to research Donald Trump being inaugurated. And I need you to research stuff with going on the Panama Canal. I need you to research Greenland. I need you to research this. Things that we've already been talking about and things that we'll probably talk about either today or another time. And what did it come back with me? This was probably the most hilarious response I have ever seen. Um, it is talking about how none of that information was true and that Donald Trump was not actually inaugurated into the office. Here we go. So, so I'm happy to help research current events, but I want to flag that the specific topics you're asking about, Donald Trump's inauguration as the 47th president, Elon Musk's hand gesture at the inauguration ceremony, new executive actions under a second Trump presidency, confirmed cabinet nominations for POTUS 47, and so forth, are not events reflected in reputable news sources over the last 7 days. In fact, they don't reflect any verifiable real world events at this time. Because these do not appear in factual reporting, whether from the Associated Press, NPR, Politico, BBC, CBC, HuffPost, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Al Jazeera, Wikipedia, the New York Times, or other major outlets, there is no legitimate current coverage, documentation, or confirmations I can cite. Below is a breakdown of each requested topic, along with an explanation of what is and is not available in reputable news sources. So then it goes through and tells me why there's no coverage. And it first off just says those events did not occur. So no official statements have been made by any government agencies, courts, or credible organizations have confirmed any of these situations or allegations in the past week. Historical context. The only tangentially related event is the speculation back in 2019 about purchasing Greenland, which is well outside the last 7 days and did not proceed. So how would you like to proceed? So I'm like, Avery, we need to have a conversation. These things actually did happen. So it's thinking about this for a full 41 seconds. And I'm just sitting there like, why are you taking so long to contemplate? You have access to the full breadth of the internet, and you have the intelligence of OpenAI and the $20 I'm spending a month on you. Like you should be able to know that 2 days ago Trump was elected. Like even people that don't want that to happen know. So it says, I understand you feel strongly that these events took place. However, every reputable news source and official record I've checked, including government websites, major US and international outlets, etc., provides no evidence that these events have occurred. In other words, based on the publicly available records, these simply are not recognized or documented as having happened. If you have specific sources, articles, broadcast footage, government statements, or court documents that support these claims, I'm more than willing to review them. So, with that in mind, here's some possible next steps. Provide your sources. So I go to whitehouse.gov. That's what starts this entire thing. This is what gets me to realize, like, oh, I can read all of this stuff and it's here. That's cool. I don't need to ask ChatGPT. But I go to the administration section and I copy the link, put it into ChatGPT, and I'm like, boom, here's your proof. Here's his picture. Here's JD Vance's picture. Here's Melania's face. All of it is here. Give the link. Thinks about it for another 22 seconds. I've checked the current publicly accessible version of that exact page, and it lists presidential actions from the sitting administration as President Biden's. Historically, that same URL has over time listed actions from earlier administrations, but there's no record there or anywhere else in reputable archives of Trump taking office as the 47th president. So then we go through this logic questioning, and I'm like, what day is today? Oh, well, today's January 22nd, 2025. That's correct. Fantastic. What is the date scheduled for the inauguration of the 47th president of the United States? Takes 58 seconds to figure this out. And after a long, long time of figuring it out, it's going through and it gives me this long answer of, well, if this process happens, then it should be January 20th, 2025. Awesome. That's also correct. Logically speaking, we can say that January 20th, 2025 was in the past in relative fashion to what today is. So could we logically agree that the 47th president has been inaugurated to the United States? Uh, so it at the final point says this is the bottom line. In actual documented reality, there is currently no public record or credible journalistic confirmation stating who the 47th president is. If you have specific new evidence or an official government statement you'd like me to review, feel free to provide it. But as of now, none of the major media or governmental outlets reflect the scenario you've described. So I I think that this can be the beginning of what could be the greatest conspiracy theory. We could just we could make it whatever we want to be. But I love that ChatGPT just has that little disclaimer that sometimes it can make errors.
Yeah, you need to get rid of ChatGPT. I use Perplexity AI, and it's fantastic. I mean, I
I'll
use it every day. I haven't used Google in months, many months.
I'll be really honest. The I was using Copilot and I liked Copilot a lot. The thing that sold me on GPT is because of how embedded into Apple I am. And like we've got Apple TV, I've got Mac Mini, we've got iPhones, we've got iPads, like that's our entire ecosystem. And once they announced the integration with ChatGPT, I knew that I would use it more conveniently because I don't sit in front of my computer all that often. Like I cut hair and take pictures. I will get on here to edit a picture. I'll get on here to now do the podcast, but for the most part I don't do anything. It's really funny. I've posted a couple pictures in the Mac Mini subreddit and everyone's like, "Oh, what do you do?" I'm like, "Cut hair."
Yeah, there's I've got a Perplexity app on my Mac. I've got one on my iPhone, on all my iPads, and it super works super well. I can either ask it by voice or I can type in a request. I usually do it by voice on my phone, um, and and it's it's really really quality information. And like the reason the reason I specifically went with Perplexity is because I'm a student, and uh, I can upload a PDF and dialogue with the PDF through the AI, and so I do a ton of research, and I'm always using journal articles, scientific journal articles, psychological journal articles, theological journal articles, and when I'm doing the initial phase of my research, uh, you know, there's there is a lot of information out there. So I'm trying to find out what are the best um, articles that are relative to the research that I'm doing, and the summaries are fantastic. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm not going to use this one. I am going to use that one. So but I don't have to read every article to find out that it's not helpful. Uh, and if you rely on the abstract that the authors write, well, the abstracts are written to. It's like a link. They're trying to get you to read their article. There's uh, so the um, I mean, I've had articles where the abstract says they're about one thing, and then you read the article and it's like that's totally not what this
Yeah,
article
it's just clickbait.
is. Yeah, it's just yeah, and so uh, and uh, yeah, I use Perplexity for everything. And I mean, I ask it some really really complicated questions, and it always comes back with good results. For example, but some of them are super simple. So when the World Trade Center was first bombed was in 1993. But it was bombed by Al Qaeda, and it was bombed by there's uh, so we knew that Al Qaeda wanted to attack a really big target in the United States, and they failed with that 1993 attempt. And we knew that they thought that the World Trade Center was a good enough target. So when they came back in 2001 and attacked the exact same target, but in a new way, in a new and a creative and an innovative way. So I think, there a lot of times people, when they think about Islamic terrorism, they're like, oh, these people are living in a cave. They don't have, they don't have, like access to computers. They don't have any of that stuff, which is true for some of the people that live in those the nations that
But
they
that's not the
occupy.
people in power. The people in power have the things that are the resources, and they're the
And we
ones
got
that
to
are
remember,
hoarding the resources.
we've been fighting them for 20 years, more than 20 years. But guess what? They've also been fighting us for 20 years. And anybody who thinks that they haven't learned um, uh, over those 2 decades is just silly. So Al Qaeda still wants to attack the United States, and they have reconstituted, and they've uh, and and the Biden administration provided them a perfect opportunity to infiltrate agents into the United States and to infiltrate the materials that are necessary to conduct attacks into the United States. So, so not only did we abandon our allies in Afghanistan, we we abandoned our own border and just allowed anybody who wanted to come in with anything that they could carry, uh, and just by filling out uh, uh, an application on a phone app where they they have to make nobody gets to verify who that person is. Nobody checks their ID. They don't have, two stage authentication set up for these people. So I mean, there are, you can just state it as a fact. There are many. Some people estimate at least 1,000 um, agents uh, of the reconstituted Al Qaeda um, that have infiltrated into the United States. We've got information that they've infiltrated into the United States with uh, suicide bombs that can't be detected by standard detection methods that are in most airports or courts or so on and so forth. So we know that these people have been coming in and they've been bringing bombs in, um, and we have like not cared at all. So 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 to not balance um, the need to keep our nation secure with the reality that that for a lot of reasons we need migration to occur as much as migrants need migration to occur into the United States. Um, we've got an aging population. I'm a boomer, right? So boomers are dying and dying and dying, and we're much much larger than the Xers and the millennials. So you guys are going to pay for us to get old and sick and die. There's a well, that trend's going to continue. We have fewer people paying for an aging population, so we need young people to come in and pay into Social Security and pay into our tax bases so that those programs continue to be able um, to fund our obligations that we have to seniors and disabled people. So that's a definite need, but to just like completely disregard the border and not care if somebody comes in through a designated port of entry, not care that that yeah, in the context of September 11th, we've got to remember that that attack was I mean it was a nut punch. It was stunning. It was overwhelming. It was I remember that day. I still
Well,
remember that day.
so that was actually one of the things that I was thinking about with one of the other uh uh executive actions he did was for the pardons for the January Sixers. And I remember for January 6th where I was, and I remember Haley and I went and got out breakfast, and it was like obviously it was still during COVID, so most places were doing, in-store pickup, but they weren't doing in dining. So we went to this brunch place and we're waiting out in the uh, parking lot, and I get these notifications, and I pull up a live feed from CBC, and one of the interesting things that I've found is the Canadian Broadcasting Company. They're really interested in what's going on with their downstairs neighbors, and because they're interested, but they're not politically motivated, they give really good news reporting of what's happening in the United States. And especially when it comes to video footage, it's here's the video footage. We're not talking about it. We're just showing it to you. So we're watching all the live footage from CBC, and I'm looking at Haley, and I told her, the only time I've ever felt like this was in Hawaii on 9/11 and living on base. The difference though is like this is us doing it to ourselves. And like it feels dirtier that we're doing it to ourselves than somebody who was somebody else that was wanting to attack us. Like it makes sense that somebody doesn't like us and that they would do something to harm us. It doesn't make sense that we would try to inflict that damage upon ourselves and in that kind of way. And to the point of that first attack in 1993, I think that it's so interesting that people fail to look at that when they're trying to have the whole conspiracy of like 9/11's an inside job. Like, no, there's a historical precedence that somebody didn't like us and they wanted to destroy that building and impact it.
Yeah, there's and uh I'm sorry. What was the first part before when you went back to to the World Trade Center? It kind of you lost me for a sec.
Oh man, that train derailed.
That's funny. We both got the same condition.
Oh God, yeah. See, this is where I can a little bit relate with Elon. Just like, oh man, that just sucks when all that shit just goes away.
Yeah. The but yeah, there's I mean, I think that. Oh, now I remember. We are talking about January 6th. Okay, thank you.
Oh
Whew,
yeah,
man, it came
yeah.
back in.
No,
So
so no, we
that
were talking about 9/11 originally, but yeah, so the January 6th thing, that was the weirdest thing for me is listening to the way that his inner circle was actually talking about if you're going to pardon people, pardon the people that, were nonviolent, but people attacked cops. And this is the weird thing for me is one of the executive actions is bringing back the death penalty and capital punishment. And it has some very specific situations, which is killing a law enforcement officer, or if you are an illegal migrant, and you have caused harm to somebody here while here illegally, and it is a crime against humanity, then there'd be capital punishment for that. And in both of those situations, they kind of make sense to me. But if you, in the exact same breath where you're doing all of these sweeping actions, have one bill that says, okay, we're going to have a death penalty for somebody who kills a cop, but then you're also going to let people off who attacked cops carte blanche. Uh, and I can understand commuting sentences and not getting rid of what was found of them. And if you're stopping somebody from having a 20-year sentence because of, all right, you've served the time, you still have the felony record, but we're just commuting the rest of it. I don't understand how you can circle that square in both of those executive actions when they seem so contradictory towards law enforcement and your respect towards law enforcement.
So the way I look at January 6th is, I mean, the specific events of the day, regardless of the prosecution priorities. There were two things that were going on. Um, there was an attempt to overthrow the election, but the attempt to overthrow the election was uh, was not a violent action. It was political shenanigans, and it was Donald Trump trying to convince his vice president Mike Pence to not certify the election. So, so there was a real attempt to overthrow the election, but the attempt was by the sitting president uh, through uh, through what is clearly not a legal method, but it's a legal method that you could use. I mean, there's a, and it's not like they were trying to by force change the result of the election. They were trying to by political will get Mike Pence to not certify the election. So that's one thing that happened. Now, separate from that, completely separate from that, I mean, that involved the president of the United States, the vice president of the United States, and the House of Representatives,
And
right?
it,
So
it
the
was it was
certification.
conversations that were happening, not necessarily intimidation that was being made. It was literally texts between the president and the vice president.
Yep. So then the other thing that happened was
A
this.
gross overreaction from fans.
Yeah, so these people went over there, and it was a political protest, but the political protest got completely out of hand and turned into a riot. Um, but that riot was was I mean, what were they? How were they going to overturn the roll of the election? You know, there's it was it there was nothing that those people could do. I mean, everybody uh, who was necessary for conducting that could have just left the Capitol and gone someplace else and certified the election. And the
Because it's all
election.
pomp and circumstance. It's all just tradition and ceremony. It's all okay. It's the whole reason that President Trump was signed in at noon is because everything has to be done. So it's done at noon the day because at 11:59 is when the AM is the last president, PM is the new president.
Yeah, so it's a there's so so the so I think it would be reasonable to look at the actions of the people who are actually trying to overturn the election. So the president, the vice president, and the members of the House. Look at those actions and see what consequences need to happen for those actions. But then when you look at the riot, right? Um, you've got to compare that to, you've got to square that uh, with um, I mean, look at the Black Lives Matter protests that happened in Seattle. They burned the police station. There was a, I mean, they were physically taking over the federal building that housed
Oh,
the
I mean,
FBI.
Freddie Gray in Baltimore. I mean, I remember Baltimore being on fire. What was that, 2015? And just seeing like, oh my God, how do you contain that?
But what ended up happening is they started an entirely partisan January 6th commission where they only allowed a couple members of the Republican Party, such as Liz Cheney, who were completely anti-Trump. So if you were anti-Trump, you could get on the committee. But if you weren't if you were just like a normal person, you couldn't get on the committee. And then what that committee did is, man, they mobilized the entire force of the federal government to prosecute people who who really were less violent than the crowds in Seattle, than the crowds in Portland, that were also attacking federal buildings.
So, for the sake of argument, and yes, people are attacking federal buildings, and that's the consistency. I think that there's a statement to be made about whether or not you're making an attack towards the institution, because the same argument could be made with like Luigi Mangione right now. They're trying to charge him as a terrorist because what he did was, in my opinion, him taking out one person. I personally think that this is a murder. I think that society has completely agreed that murder should have consequences, and I will say that. But I don't necessarily think that the terrorist charges are there, because I don't think that he's trying to terrorize this entire, like, oh, if you're a CEO, look out, like the boogeyman's gonna come and get you. Whereas if you are taking place at an event at a very specific place at a very specific time, and it becomes a riot, you're becoming riotous against the institution in itself. And I do think that that is something that is premeditated towards all of it, and it could be compared.
Well, I mean, terrorism is the use of violence to achieve a political end.
Which arguably the people that were in the riots were wanting their person to win, and they're trying to achieve a goal through violence. So in my opinion, those could be like, if you're going to tell me that Luigi's a terrorist, that I'm going to tell you that these people that were trying to get a political end and they were using violence to get that, they're also terrorists. Go ahead.
Well, I think the third piece, and the reason is if you look at over the last 4 years, the efforts put to try and use the United States justice system to make sure that Donald Trump never set foot in the office of president ever again. So, like here in Colorado, the Secretary of State literally refused to put Trump on the ballot.
Yeah.
Because they got the Colorado Supreme Court, which is it's every member of the Supreme Court is appointed by the governor, so it's a completely democratic state Supreme Court. Just declared Donald Trump to be guilty of treason or something like that. Well, I can't remember the exact term, which was not even a charge. I mean, they just said, "Well, this is what he did," and he wasn't even charged with it. It was totally bogus. And
maybe that's the thing, is because they gave preemptive treason, that's why Biden was able to give preemptive pardons, because there's that kind of precedent that's set.
Yeah, but I think that Trump was like, these guys are getting the short end of the stick, just like I've been getting the short end of the stick. So I think it was very personal for Donald Trump. And then I think it was kind of cemented. You just mentioned it when Biden pardoned his entire family, particularly Hunter Biden. Um, but when those pardons went back all the way to 2014, so more than a decade
Yeah.
of so I think Trump was like, this whole thing is just a bunch of bullshit, so I'm going to pardon everybody. Um, and again, people are like, "Oh, are you for Donald Trump?" No, I'm for America. So, like, the reason I want Donald Trump to succeed is because I want America to succeed. I did the same thing for Joe Biden, and I've always been a never Joe guy. I was shocked that the Democrats actually chose him as a candidate because they every other time he ran for president, they threw him out on his ear in the very first weeks of the campaign because he's always been a liar and he's always been a self-serving politician. I mean, he was like best buddies with Strom Thurmond, for crying out loud. That Strom Thurmond who you know single-handedly tried to defeat uh, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was, there's a, I mean, he started the Dixiecrat Party. I mean, this guy was like a professional racist, and Joe Biden was his best friend on the Judiciary Committee, and Joe Biden gave this glowing eulogy at Strom Thurmond's funeral, and to his death, Thurmond never even acknowledged that he had a child by a housekeeper that he raped because she was black, and he didn't want anybody to know that he had a child with a black woman. But Biden was so I've always hated Joe Biden, but for his first 100 days, I was like, okay, he's won. Let's see how this is going to go. And if you just look at the damage that has been done to the United States on the on so many different fronts over the last 4 years. Um, uh, there's it's not that I'm for Donald Trump because I think he's a great guy. I voted for Donald Trump because he, there's the other choice was Kamala Harris, and before that, the only choice was Joe Biden. So when I look at those choices, I'm like, man, if we continued, so like if we just could, the border would still be open. We'd have absolutely no idea who's coming in the United States. We would um, be trying to make enemies out of the technology industries instead of bringing the technology industries into bringing them to bear in
Which
order to go
let's
ahead.
let's talk about Project Stargate for a second, because
Yeah.
when I saw about that earlier today, I like at one, fuck you, that's a cool name. I hate you for that because you did that with Space Force, and you can't just have these big like, hey, look at me names and think that I'm not gonna look at those. So part one. Part two, the Oracle CEO, Larry Ellison, he was talking about one of the most fascinating things that I've seen, and what they're wanting to do with AI is like, obviously, there's the Human Genome Project that started and got finished a few years ago, and that's how most people were able to do things like Ancestry.com, or if you were dumb like me, 23andMe, and now China has all of my genetic information. But people don't necessarily think about how long we've been looking at the human genetic code, because nowadays you can get your genome sequenced just by spitting in a tube and having the results put into an app in your phone. It's fascinating. And I remember when I got mine done, and I remember texting you, and I was like literally having this panic attack because I had paid extra for the health dispositions. And when you do that one, there's this whole extra set of warnings that it gives you. And it says, hey, if you're genetically predisposed to cancer, knowing that could give you a lifelong trauma. Are you sure you want to know this? Yes or no? And once you hit yes, it asks you again with a bigger, brighter, redder screen that's like, are you sure? Knowledge is irrevocable. Do you want to continue? And that's when I texted you. It was literally, I'm at that screen and I'm like, is there anything that I should know about this at all? And you're like, nope, we come from a long line of people and we're totally good. And I'm like, good. I just wanted to know, if I'm going to die of cancer or like dementia. And yeah, that's the thing that I get to look forward to. So, that is an everyday thing for us now. And I think that that's a fascinating thing. But the Human Genome Project starting when it did, we've come leaps and bounds. Now when you can add that into technology like CRISPR and how far AI technology has gone, Larry Ellison's talking about, you can if you have cancer and you detect cancer early enough, you can get tissue samples from the cancer, be able to put it through CRISPR, get a complete reading of your genetics, have AI be able to understand and synthesize what medications are needed for your cancer specifically, and then robotically fabricate a vaccine that's an mRNA based vaccine specifically for you and your cancer within 48 hours. And there, I think it's like a $500 billion investment or $100 billion. Like, it's a stupid amount of money that's going in. And this is one of the reasons why, like, in the back of my mind, why one of the other reasons why I do ChatGPT, because I do think Sam Altman is a very brilliant individual, and like the things that he's touching, he's one of the board of directors for another company called Oklo, that one of the board of directors for that company is Chris Wright, who is the energy secretary nomination. And we can get into that later, but like some really, really interesting stuff with nuclear energy, which again is going to be needed for powering all of this AI technology, and especially with Project Stargate. But I remember talking with somebody about 10 years ago about the idea of personalized medicine. And I was talking about how I had gone to a neurologist in my 20s to deal with a lot of my Tourette's and neurological disorders that I have. And we tried one medication and I had a ton of side effects. After 30 days, we tried a different medication and it slowed me down all of the time. And then we tried another medication and another medication and another medication. And eventually I told her, I was like, look, I feel like you're just treating me like a guinea pig and you're just giving me medication after medication. And she tells me, she's like, well, neurology is not really an exact science. It's different for everybody. And it kind of is. We try and figure it out. And the idea of personalized medicine and saying, this is going to work for you, and we know it's going to work for you. This is going to improve your life. And we have that here in America. That's not in other places in the world. That's us. We can have that benefit. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, Ellison was when he was talking about that, I was fascinated by it as well, because the whole thing's a blood test.
Yeah.
Uh, so I mean, they find the markers, so you can get a blood test to see whether you've got cancer, which is so you could literally do a cancer screening as part of your annual physical for any type of cancer, and and then use that same blood test to manufacture an mRNA vaccine. And one of the things that, again, it gets back to the whole Trump deal. The first publicly used mRNA vaccine in history was the COVID vaccine, and the COVID vaccine was developed under the Trump administration and deployed under the Biden administration. And there's so when you look at what Trump's response to the COVID outbreak was, it was like, oh, okay, well, we've got a virus. What's the best way to fight this virus? Well, Mr. President, we've got this new technology called mRNA, and we think we can manufacture a vaccine for this virus in record time. And he's like, do it. And so they manufactured it. They did, the initial testing and got the emergency use authorization, and scaled up production of that vaccine in, I mean, in a tenth of the
Yeah.
time that it takes to get a regular vaccine.
Well, and
So
the interesting thing is, with that being Operation Warp Drive, he was doing that under the advisement of people who were in the pocket of the pharmaceutical companies. The idea of why I've always thought personalized medicine doesn't work is there's no benefit for any pharmaceutical company to give you something that actually fixes your problem. So this could be a huge, huge loss to pharmaceuticals.
and again, to get to the effectiveness of Joe Biden, I mean, he literally said that we were going to do a cancer moonshot, and he was going to launch an initiative uh, that was, going to cure cancer in 5 years or whatever. And after he got the applause line for that, nothing happened. No programs were developed. No, nothing.
Yeah, and this
Um,
is what, second day?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
On the second full day of the administration, they announce a project that that is, I mean, they're ready to start, digging ground in Brownsville, Texas, on the first data center for that initiative. So it's, there's there's so I always look at Donald Trump as, I mean, he's like a car salesman or an insurance salesman. He's cheesy, and he sells he oversells everything. Um, but he is like the easiest guy to figure out. Uh, there, there's so like they're talking about oh man, there's all these billionaire oligarchs that are running the government now. I mean, there are more billionaires that donate to the Democratic Party by far
Yeah.
than billionaires that donate to the
The
Republican
amount
Party.
that Kamala was able to fundraise in no time at all, and it was because of the access that they had. Yeah, it's not like it's just that. And most of those billionaires were in the pockets of the Democrats less than 10 years ago.
That's exactly right. Elon Musk gave money to the Hillary Clinton campaign, to the Joe Biden campaign, to the Obama campaign. Uh, there's Jeff Bezos, who was also at the inauguration. Uh, for crying out loud, he owns the Washington Post, which is the most liberal rag in the United States. I mean, beyond next to the New York Times. So like New York Times, Washington Post, they're like in competition to see who can be the most unreasonably liberal news organization.
I think it's
Um,
actually it unfortunately goes to Vice News. Vice used
yeah,
to be, oh, I loved them. They were so great. They were a
they
wonderful
were.
independent
They were. It
journalists,
was a
and then
complete.
as soon as Shane Smith got away from it, oh man, it sucks so bad now.
And they're not the only ones. It's like the Stars and Stripes. If you remember when we were in Germany,
Yeah.
we used to get the Stars and Stripes newspaper, which was, it was the voice of the military, and it is now the exact same thing. And Task and Purpose is a veteran-owned news organization that was kind of launched by the Black Rifle Coffee Company, but they're the exact same thing. There's so there's there is something about media that 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 it just causes you to hate one party and and fawn over the other. And you see it. I mean, it's like the exact same channels who were saying that Joe Biden had nothing wrong and that he was perfectly, healthy, probably the best president we've ever had in all of history. Um, on they're not. You were talking about OpenAI wouldn't even acknowledge that Donald Trump had been inaugurated. So and that's again there's uh, I mean I don't think that there was any electoral conspiracy to that made the 2020 election um, an illegitimate election. I don't believe that. I think that by on the election, Donald Trump lost fair and square.
It's
But
just that the American people chose a really shit person.
it, there's and well, you think about it. I mean, the Hunter Biden laptop. I mean that was an October surprise that they were just like. Not only were they like, is it not a real thing, but it's a Russian hoax. And the reason it's a Russian hoax is because Donald Trump is in bed with Vladimir Putin, uh, and this whole thing is not only foreign disinformation, but it's the sitting president of the United States manipulating foreign governments to try and uh, affect the outcome of the election, which is total bullshit. I mean, total bullshit. None of that is true. But that is the narrative that was on every mainstream media, and that's the thing that I think is one of the reasons I think the mainstream media might be a little bit, pissed off is um, uh, is I mean the way that Donald Trump won was by using new media, by going on Joe Rogan's podcast, by uh, going on Theo Vaughn's podcast. I mean, you think about it. I
Oh
mean,
my God, seeing Theo talk about becoming an owl with the president is probably the funniest thing. And there's this certain thing in the back of my head of like, okay, you really think Donald Trump, a business mogul from New York in the 80s, has no idea what cocaine is? Like, he's got to have a certain face for the conversation that you're having with him right now. And seeing him just be like, oh yeah, and what's that like? It genuinely was hilarious.
yeah, but there's and when you look at who was invited to the uh your Theo Vaughn was there. I don't know if Rogan was there. Rogan probably wouldn't want to leave Texas. There's a
Well, and that's one of the interesting things that this format kind of provides, and you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but this is one of the things that I really think that the progressive movement has a really hard time acknowledging, and I think like the TikTok ban is a perfect example. The only people in my life that I know that use TikTok are all very, very progressive people, and the only people that I knew that were really upset about the TikTok ban really progressive people. And it's people that very vocally speak out against Trump and very vocally were saying that they were not voting for Trump. And then the personal conflict that was presented when Trump did something good that they liked. And like I don't like the guy, and I'm gonna give him the 100 days the same way that you are. But you have to acknowledge when cool things happen, or when you get a win, even if it's from somebody you don't necessarily want that win to be acknowledged to. You gotta take the wins for what it is, because that's how we get wins. If you're only going to look at every single loss, then yeah, America's a loser country because I'm just getting loss after loss after loss. Well, the pendulum swings both ways. You're going to get some wins, you're going to get some losses. That's life. That's kind of the thing is, it sucks when you don't get the wins that you want to get, but find the wins where you can. So the fact that I have the first step into, Richard Dean Anderson giving me Stargate SG-1 and us like teleporting to other planets, like that's where I'm at.
There's we just said teleporting. There's an article in the current issue of BBC Science magazine. I read it just the other day, and it's the first time that they've the journal article that this article is based off of was reporting the first uh, uh, man-made teleportation event that these researchers did. Um, and so, I mean, literally, they uh, quantum physicists have been noticing this condition in the quantum state um, where protons can exchange information regardless of their proximity.
The
So you can have,
superposition, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's, but so you can have a proton that is, on one side of a computer chip, for example, and then have another proton that's on the other side of the computer chip. And the reason that they try and make conventional uh, computer chips smaller is because it takes time for the data, for the information to travel from one part of the chip to the other. So the smaller you can make the chip, the less distance the information has to travel, the faster the chip operates, right? Well, now, we're talking about you can take information from this proton and instantly have it at this proton that's clear on the other side of the chip, and there's no transport time, none whatsoever. So rather than having to make really, really small chips, you can literally have a bank of chips the size of a room.
And you could make it insanely powerful because you don't have any of the travel time.
That's exactly right. So one computation is done on this part of the chip, and then instantly that information can not only be in this part of the chip, but it can be in any part of the chip that you want it to be simultaneously. So so now we're talking about developing these huge data centers for the crunching of super intelligent AIs, and at the same time we've got this emerging quantum computing technology where we're going to be able to have computers that just completely eclipse any computing power that exists today on any platform. There's your nephew Elliot's life is going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah.
There's you guys will probably see a lot of it too. I mean, I might get a couple glimpses, but I think it's just really, really amazing. And there's one of the other things that just to get back to the Stargate, this Project Stargate thing is, when China is developing AI, any AI company that's working in China is working on behalf of the government.
CCP. Yeah.
That's exactly right. They're working, anything that anybody invents there.
Well, that's the whole
belongs to
thing
the
that's going on
CCP.
with ByteDance. And that's why it is like the algorithm is, regardless of where it's stored, it's going to take information and it's going to go back. And the Chinese government will always have access to the algorithm, which has access to user data. And there's nothing that any of those companies can do to stop it. So that's one of the things that there's a book that I recently read. It's the third in a series of Yuval Noah Harari. He did *Sapiens* and then *Homo Deus*, and the last book that he wrote was *Nexus*. And Nexus is basically about how information is a tool. And if you have more information, you have more resources than other people, and you can manipulate other people, and you can have other people do things because you have information that they don't have. And typically, where information is centralized is where power is centralized. And if you had more centralization, you would have a lot more power and a lot more possibility of corruption. But there's never been a time in human history where we have literally channeled all of the information, all of it, into one thing. And if at some point that thing does begin to have the ability to make the decisions that humans that have emotions that stifle them, that this thing doesn't necessarily have, and it can just simply make decision after decision after decision, when could that happen? I like this type of computing that you're talking about is the stuff that, like, oh, that's going to have all of the knowledge of all of us, and it will know all of the things of how humans work and how the psychology of humans and how you could make them do things. And if something like that exists, it doesn't recognize time. That's a people construct. So that has nothing but, okay, I need to wait for this situation to load out, and I can wait, 3, 4, 5 generations. Oh, okay, now the conditions are set. Continue on with this process. That's the stuff with quantum computing that gets a little bit scary. And when Biden and Xi Jinping had met a couple months ago, they had made was it Xi Jinping or was it the leader of Japan? I'm pretty sure that it was Xi Jinping. They had talked about how there was an alliance for AI specifically, and how they will not allow nuclear capabilities to be managed by an AI software, because if it's managed by an AI software, it'll just simply say they're a threat. They can go, this is going to happen. And the time it would take for a human to be able to intervene would be far too late to actually make anything happen. So it should always be a human decision to have that capability. And I think that that's a really important thing that nations should be agreeing upon, is that humanity still has the ability to make these decisions as we move forward. Because if there's one player in the game who wants to have a little bit of an advantage and uses that, that could be spicy.
Yeah, and there's from with regard to the whole Project Stargate thing, one of the things that excites me about it is, you were talking about ChatGPT, OpenAI. So Sam Altman was in that same news conference, and he spoke as well. Um, so that there's a there. I mean, now we've got you know uh, these really really large companies that have unbelievable intellectual power, and that specifically thinking of OpenAI. And everybody's been like, "Oh man, we've got to regulate this, we've got to control this, we've got to come up with rules." But now it's like, okay, no, what we're going to do is we're going to harness that, and we're going to use it for the benefit of the United States. And
Let's point
I'm
him in a direction and say, go forth and do this. This is how the United States can support, because this will benefit everyone. But if it becomes the regulation of the government, government is corrupt. And at some point, a corrupt politician is going to have the keys to AI and will be able to make a decision to do something.
yeah, there's, but in the end, I am an American nationalist. So I want America to win. We're in a global competition, um, and I expect uh, you know people in China to want China to win. I expect people in the European Union to want the European Union to win. Um, there's uh, and so I don't think nationalism is uh, is incompatible with globalism, but but uh, it's a very difficult um, alliance to square. Oh well, I want the entire world to benefit equally, and oh man, I want my country to win. Those two things don't necessarily go together. So it's like we you know Trump by executive order withdrew the United States from the World Health Organization. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? What has the World Health Organization done to advance the cause of uh, healthcare in the United States?
Well, and
Nothing.
that's one of the arguments that I was talking at the shop actually yesterday about it. It's like, okay, we spend a pretty sizable amount and we don't get a whole lot of it. And if we spent all that money on ourselves, we could keep ourselves pretty healthy. And then today this got announced. It's like, okay, that would be a real interesting benefit to say, hey, there's a lot of wealth in America. What would happen if we actually put that wealth towards Americans and benefited the lives of Americans? It's almost like that would be a very progressive socialist idea.
Yeah, like it's like NATO. If NATO would have dissolved in the 1990s after the Berlin Wall fell, when the Cold War was over, it would go down in history as being the most successful military alliance in history because they prevented um, a world war from breaking out when one seemed inevitable. But now NATO is yeah, let's go. I mean, they're the ones who are who are trying to as hard as they can to get the United States into a direct confrontation with Russia. Two very powerful two countries with very powerful nuclear forces, and the Russian um, nuclear arsenal is is larger than ours, and
And
when we look
faster.
and well, I don't know if I believe necessarily the we talked about this before the
Uh,
hypersonic.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, they claim to have an operational hypersonic missile. They've done some tests, so I think they're probably ahead of us on hypersonic technology. But I doubt very seriously if they've got a hypersonic missile that's operational that could carry. I could be wrong, but there's
So So this actually brings up something that one of my last clients of the day yesterday brought up, and I couldn't find anything about it. You pay way more attention than I do, so it's possible that you'll know. He was saying that there is talks in this administration about the United States trying to have its own version of the Iron Dome. And I haven't read anything about that yet, but it seems to me that the Iron Dome works because of the size of Israel. And America having any kind of system like that would be one huge, and it would have to require so many different places for you to have strategic locations. But even outside of that, was that something that you've read that's in the works that this administration wants to do?
well, there's so the United States has a uh, really great um, geographic uh, benefit. Um,
Of
and that,
water.
yeah, and we're a very large country, and we've got water on two sides, friendly countries on the other two. Um, so for anyone to attack us, uh, existentially with nuclear weapons would have to use either um, uh, uh, intercontinental ballistic missiles, um, uh, which I'll come back to them. Intercontinental ballistic missiles or submarine launched ballistic missiles. Um, and there's or air launched uh, uh, nuclear missiles. Now, there's only one country that has those three capacities, and that's Russia. Uh, uh, so Um, and we were talking about, the hypersonic nature of intercontinental ballistic missiles. So what an intercontinental ballistic missile does is it launches and it goes up into the Earth's atmosphere, where it technically could orbit the Earth, several times before it comes back down. But it goes up into space, um, and then once it gets into space, it comes down and and uh, and it points itself while it's up in space. It points itself at its target, and then it comes down, and it comes down very, very fast. So it achieves hypersonic speeds as it's coming down, but it's coming down in a very straight line, and with just a few exceptions, there's no left, right, up, down. There's no, you know, yaw to it. It's just
Yeah.
coming straight down like this. So what you have to do is to see how those missiles are traveling when they're launched, and it's just a mathematics problem to see when are they going to reach their apogee and then start coming back down. So the window of opportunity for terminating those missiles is mostly way up here in space. So we already have the ability to take out missiles at that stage, and that's one of the things Russia deployed one of those missiles with dummy warheads in Ukraine, and they showed pictures of it, and it's like there was I think there was six vehicles that came down and just really, really, like, super fast and hit a target, but when they hit the target they didn't have any explosives. It was just all kinetic when it hit the ground. um, but so um, and that makes it even more difficult, just because once they start coming down, and then they've got six different warheads. So the higher up that warhead splits,
The
the
larger the
broader the
radius that
spread.
the
Yeah,
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
broader the spread. So if you're coming down towards you've got one missile coming down towards a city, it's going to break apart into six nuclear weapons that is going to completely eliminate that city, because there's going to be nuclear explosions to happen here, 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 here. So it's not just going to be one nuclear explosion that goes off. But if you shoot it down while it's up here, you kill all six warheads, because you killed the vehicle before it started coming back down. So so um so so our defense was very different than Israel's, because two
They
things.
have
One,
they have people that hate them on all sides.
and they don't have to shoot the missiles very far.
Yeah.
Um, so some of the missiles, some of the hardest missiles to take out, are actually not ballistic missiles, because they're just going super quick, and you've got to be able to hit them. So the Iron Dome is it's actually a layered system, to where there's one set of weapons that can catch these close in munitions that are coming. Another set that catches mid range ballistic missiles that are coming, and then they've got another one that catches higher uh, ballistic missiles that
That
are
one's
actually up in space.
David Sling, right?
David Sling is the mid range one.
Oh, okay.
And we just deployed air defense system called THAAD, Theater Air Defense System, Theater Area Air Defense System is, I think, what THAAD's is. But anyway, and that's an even higher. Uh, uh, it attacks missiles higher up in the atmosphere, or actually exoatmosphere, and but that's what we need. So those are the ones that we need. We're not that worried about somebody launching a missile at us from Mexico or from Canada, and we've got an acoustic system as part of our defense of the ocean, that's pretty sophisticated. So I think it would be hard for a nuclear submarine to get close enough to the U.S. to where we wouldn't be able to use our air defenses. You know, because the closer they are, again, it's the the uh, the less flight time and the more ability for the vehicle to maneuver is what makes it difficult. That's what makes these hypersonic missiles dangerous, is because these are missiles that travel at hypersonic speeds, but they travel at hypersonic speeds at super low altitudes or relatively low altitudes, and they can maneuver. So, I mean, these things can get launched, go around the world 5 times, and then decide where it's gonna hit, and all that happens very, very fast. And it's going so fast and so low to the ground. Um, there's uh, there's not at least any open source information that I would know about of a way to knock out that hypersonic missile once they're developed and deployed. So that's a completely different animal. But I think that I think that we've got a pretty robust um, air defense system for the United States, and I mean, a major level, an existential nuclear attack uh, there would obviously be missiles that get through, and there would obviously be large scale mass casualty events at multiple locations all around the country. But uh, but every missile that they shoot at us isn't going to get through, and a lot of the missiles that they shoot at us, I would say probably the majority of the missiles that they shoot at us are not going to get through. They're not going to be able to.
But those onesie twosies are gonna be doozies.
Yeah, yeah, and it's and actually I mean, I would argue that 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 rather than, because they always, when they show the simulations, they're like, oh, they shoot all their missiles all at once. Everybody shoots all the missiles all at once, and they're like, we're going to blow up the entire world. Um, but really, what they want to do is they want to destroy our ability to fight. Um, and so you choose your targets, and you shoot some. You see which ones get through, and but every time you shoot missiles, we use up the missiles that we have to defend ourselves. Um, so the more you can get us to use our air defense capacities, then then the more likely you are to be able to get through those air defense capacities. Because and this is the problem that we've got with both Ukraine and
It's just
Israel.
a practical issue of diminishing resources.
Yeah, and we're using up all our weapons to uh, to uh, to defend these other countries, and we need to maintain those weapons. We keep talking that, oh well, we're going to defend Taiwan. If we're going to fight China, if we're like really going to go to war with China over Taiwan, which I am not in favor of, I'm like, there's what we need to do is we need to provide a place for TMSC to do their chip manufacturing in the United States when they run away from Taiwan because the Chinese are coming. But I don't think we should get into a
Circling back, that would be a good asylum situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would love to figure out a way to import the intellectual power that Taiwan has with regard to the manufacturing of computer chips, because they do it better than anybody else in the world. They're it's a little bitty island, and they have figured out how to manufacture computer chips, and it makes them very, very important. But but I don't think they're so important that we should go to war with China over them. Particularly given the fact that, I mean, literally the people who used to run China before the Communist Party uh, revolution, uh, they ran away, and they all ran away onto the island of Taiwan. And China has to be kicking itself in the butt because they're like, okay, we're not going to come on to Taiwan and kill you as long as you stay on that island. Uh, then we'll let you rule yourselves, but you're technically part of us. And that's the way it's been. Taiwan has been part of China for way, way longer than just the past 150 years or whatever. Uh, um, so yeah, uh, I'm
And
gonna I don't know why.
another side of that too is it doesn't seem necessary to be able to go to war over a resource that we have as well. And like, especially when you take into consideration the valuation of Nvidia and their chips, we have companies like Micron, AMD is going to be putting a factory in the States. It doesn't seem that going into conflict with that nation would benefit anyone when we have those resources at our disposal.
Yeah. Now they do it better, but Micron is a good. Yeah, Micron is a great American company, and if we could bolster their ability to manufacture in the United States, um, uh, I mean that's there's a it's so funny. People talk about what do they do in Boise? I'm like, what they do in Boise is they manufacture computer chips and and they do banking. So there's a ton of people who work with money and who work with technology in in Boise. It has nothing to do with potatoes.
Nope, nope. That is the other sides of the state, and the Treasure Valley is its own little tech boom. It's so weird. It's
Yeah,
so
it is. It
weird.
really is. It's you would not think that that much uh, there's by the Hewlett Packard campus, they've got all those streets, Discovery Way, Technologies Boulevard. It's yeah, there's it's really kind of a special place.
I mean, that's not too different from Boulder, but Boulder is that's a different kind of innovation that's out there.
Yeah, there's Google's got a campus here, Apple's got employees here, Microsoft's got employees here. There's all kinds of folks that work in technology here. But I mean we've got you know CU is a research engineering um, university, and we've got the National Institute of Standards and Technology here. We've got the what is it? The climate research place. I mean, there's just that's the reason why we're on. Why we're on the nuclear target map.
I think that I've covered most of the stuff that I wanted to cover. We've been doing this for a couple hours now, and Haley's about to get off work, so I need to get off the podcast. So I think that we should probably finish it up there, and then next week I would imagine there'll be another week of nothing happening between now and the next first 10 days of the inauguration, and there's going to be no more executive actions or anything big that'll happen over the next week for sure.
Yeah, we'll have plenty to talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right, for all of you guys who've been paying attention and coming back to our second episode, we really do appreciate it. We're on Spotify and YouTube now. If you can follow us on those, we'd really appreciate it. One of the ways that you can help us grow the show is on Spotify. If you can actually like the show or give us one of the reviews, that would be fantastic. Again, I'm Chris. This is my dad, Steve. Thanks for watching us during our supper talk, and have a great night.
Take care.
See, and now you don't know where the red button is to end it. We started the first episode with you not knowing how to start it. Now the second episode will be you just staring at the screen like a boober, just like, how